Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, I am delighted to have with me as my guest, Cory Muscara. Cory Muscara is a former monk, host of the Practicing Human podcast, and best-selling author of the book, Stop Missing Your Life: How to Be Deeply Present in an Unpresent World. With over 1 million followers across his social media channels, Cory has gained popularity for his down-to-earth teachings on mindfulness, well-being, and mental health. He has taught mindful leadership at Columbia University, is an instructor of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and for the last 10 years has offered mindfulness keynotes, workshops, and retreats at organizations, schools, and for the general public all over the world. He is co-founder of the mindfulness.com platform, as well as a contributing teacher to the apps Simple Habit, Asana Rebel, 10% Happier, and Grokr. Cory's meditations have been heard more than 25 million times in over 150 countries. His goal is to share wisdom teachings in a practical and accessible way. Cory Muscara, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone.
So, Cory, I saw a post of yours some months back that said, "Do not mistake being authentic with being who you've always been. There's a difference between being authentic to your past self and being authentic to the person you're inspired to become."
Mm.
So I'm interested in tracing your journey from your past self or selves to the Cory that you are right now here with me for this interview and still in the process of becoming. So to start this off, as I usually do, I'm going to ask you to think back on your childhood. And specifically, what I'm interested in would be your earliest memory or your earliest sense of who it is or what it was you wanted to be.
I love that question. I don't know if I've ever even reflected on it. I can say that I've always had a outside the box orientation toward work. I originally thought, actually, okay, the first memory I have of who I wanted to be or what I wanted to do was being an inventor.
Hmm.
I would there was this period where I would just spend all day thinking of different ideas. I would ask my parents to give me a problem, like what's an issue someone could have or that's happening in the world. And then I would just go off and I'd ponder how to fix it. And then I would pitch it to them and ask if it was a good idea or a bad idea. I'd ask them if there were issues around the house that they needed help with. And then I'd go off and I'd try to negotiate some payment involved. I was like, if I fix this, how much will you give me? I definitely had a business side as well.
Hmm.
And so that was the first like thread of aliveness that I really remember that characterized young Cory and followed me through up until this day. And so there was also this hustler mentality when I remember being 5 or 6 years old, and I was captivated by the idea of garage sales. It's like, wow, you can put stuff on your front lawn, and then people will come by and they'll give you money for it. So I'd find all my used toys, things I wasn't using, and I would sit out on my driveway and just put up a stand and say garage sale. And I didn't know anything about marketing, but I was mainly just trying to sell to people, little kids on my block. And I did that with so many different things. And in sixth grade, I'd go to the grocery store with my parents, and there was a gumball machine, but there were these little figurines next to it. You charge 25 cents. I'd get one and I'd sell it for 50 cents the next day. Did that with candy when I was in high school. and so that inventor side then transitioned into like business and entrepreneurship. Um, and then halfway through my college career, I I was kind of going down a business finance track and met with this New York City hedge fund manager at the New York Stock Exchange, and I remember very vividly him giving a talk, and at the end of it, I was like almost dissociated. I was out of my body. I felt like my soul was sucked out of my body, and I was just like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I definitely do not want to end up like that. And that began more of this existential inquiry of like, what is actually worth putting my energy into? Um, and that led me into this quarter life crisis at age 19, 20, um, of just like, what is this all about? And it kept being reduced to the very trite response of happiness. Trite in the sense of like, we hear that all the time. Everyone wants to be happy, but profound in the sense of like, I think if you do reduce all of our aims to one thing, we're all motivated in some way, shape, or form toward this idea of well-being, fulfillment, happiness. And so it was just clear to me, like if that's the key thing, then I should probably figure out what that is sooner than later, um, and then try to reverse engineer my life around that. Of course, there were a lot of good structural setups for me to pursue that. You know, when you're in college, you can kind of like endlessly explore different ideas. You have college, had a bunch of college loans, which definitely made an issue with the full pursuit of that exploration. But yeah, there was a period in my time, and I got lucky at that time in my life where there was an opportunity to explore that. And my parents were also supportive of that inquiry. Um, and so, yeah, the world of entrepreneurship, of business, of like creativity, of wanting to help, and then this deep inquiry into what makes life worth living, all coincided, and kind of like then the next decade is the intersection of all of that.
That was an amazing answer. I love I love your answer. I want to home in on that New York Stock Exchange business guy because it sounds
Mhm.
like that was really like an epiphanic moment for you where a bell went off and you realized, wait a minute, what am I doing? I don't want to be like this guy. Do you remember
Yeah.
what it was about him or his presentation that caused that reaction in you? Because you were on this path. It was you had chosen it, right? And it sounds like you had a pretty intense, you know, or even just, you were so bored, even like you were so unmoved. What was it that made you say, I don't want to be like that guy? What was it about that guy?
Yeah. I'm skeptical of memory
Hmm.
because, especially when you tell your story so many times, it starts taking different shapes and forms. And, what actually happened versus what my memory says happened could be different things. I do just remember having this felt sense of there was something. I wouldn't have used this language at the time, so this is a new language to describe that memory. But there was something very like performative and disconnected and
Hmm.
disembodied about his presence. It's very much in his head. Felt like he was going through the motions. I couldn't feel his heart, his soul. Felt extractive, transactional, and I think just some tender place in me was just yeah, felt empty in the presence of that. Mainly because this was like the pinnacle. We were going to see. I think it was like a billionaire. It's like this was the guy where you wanted to get, who you wanted to be, and so there was just something so clearly lacking that yeah, I left that, and maybe because there was such an anticipation and I didn't meet that, it was like the hollowness on the other side. But because it was in New York City and my family was in New York, I remember meeting up with my parents after that and talking to them, and I told them about the experience, and they remember as well that was a really significant point in my journey, because I was just like, I don't know if that's what I want to do. Um, yeah, so I think that's the best way I could describe it at this point. Disconnected, disembodied, transactional,
Mm.
and not alive. There wasn't life there. Uh, yeah,
Have
it
you
scared me.
had, I'm guessing the answer is yes, but have you had the opposite experience where you've been in someone's presence, whatever the expectation was or wasn't going in, where you had the
Mm.
opposite experience where you were turned on, where you were moved by the person's authenticity and being in their body and actually being genuine and passionate?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I think, well, I'll use it to also highlight a learning point here for, or a teaching point for folks. Because at that point, I hadn't yet experienced that. I mean, I'm sure I had at different points, but there wasn't anything, at least from the professional sense of like, oh, this is how I want to live. And so all I had right then was, I know I don't want that. And a big question I get from people is, how do I know what to do if I don't know exactly what I want or what my desire is or what my purpose is? And that's where I'll often say, it's okay to just start with what you know you don't want and let that keep guiding you as just like, and sometimes that means being in what I like to refer to as the spiritual waiting room, where it's just like, okay, I know I can't go in that direction. I know I can't go in that direction. I don't really know where I'm pulled to, but I'm just going to stay here. And I'm going to be relentless in my staying here
Mm.
until there's some clarity, some thread of motivation or truth of like, oh, that's it. And usually that's just like a single step. It's not this big epiphany. It's just, oh, I think that would be interesting. And so now we're moving from the energy of being pulled to something rather than being pushed. And so I was at that stage of, I don't necessarily know what I want, but I know I don't want that. And that's a very uncomfortable stage to be at for anyone at any stage in life. Obviously, things are always relative, and it's one thing to do it when you're 19 and you have like lots of opportunities. Another thing to do it when you're 45 or 55 and you're taking care of a family. So, I don't think we have to use that as the platform to go, well, easy for you to do and not for me. No, it's at every stage of my life and in every stage of someone else, you're gonna have to come up against these points where there's gonna be different demands and something deeper in you is pulling you in a different direction, but the external world doesn't seem to support it. And that's the one of the deepest spiritual inquiries of, and also it doesn't mean that you have to blow up your life just because some communication comes to it, says, I don't necessarily want this, I don't think I want this. Doesn't mean that you then have to get divorced and leave the kids and go run a bar in Maui. It's just like, all is like, there's something about what's happening right now that's not exactly it. And so you just stay with like the tension, the pressure cooker of the not knowing. So I was in that for a good 6 months to a year. Halfway through my college degree, thinking I was going to go in one direction and not really sure what was next. And then that's where I was simultaneously starting to get into meditation, because I had this, if anyone's read my book, I open it by saying I didn't get into meditation for any noble reasons. I got into it because I was trying to impress a girl. So I had this hippie girlfriend in college. She was into meditation. I wanted her to think I was cool, so I started meditating. And she broke up with me shortly after that. So it's not like the meditation in that case deepened the relationship. But after that breakup, the pain of that caused me to take the meditation practice more seriously. And what I was finding was that it was not only a way to soften the edges around the pain and kind of the swirling thoughts that were coming up around the breakup, but it was also a way that I was finding a certain kind of contentment and peace and joy that was seemingly less contingent upon external variables. And so that, knowing that was happening and that was there, that seemed like a next step to explore this happiness puzzle question that I had. So I started going more into the meditation space, and I'll bypass a few steps to say that about a year later, I ended up on one of my first meditation retreats. And that was the first time that I was in the presence of someone that I was deeply compelled by. There were these two teachers Florence Mealy-O'Meara and Melissa Blacker. They were from the Center for Mindfulness at UMass, now at Brown. And there was something about their presence that it just felt steady and stable and full and connected. And someone in the audience might say something that was, uncomfortable or a bit of a jab, and they just kind of like were fully present with it. It didn't activate anything in them. They maintained boundaries, and so it wasn't like they were just like, no, it's all good, but there was just this like ultra steadiness that I hadn't experienced before. And it seemed like their happiness existed somewhere separate from just this like pain pleasure continuum of when things are good, then I'm happy. When things are bad, I'm not happy. And I said, I don't know what that is, but like, I want more of that. If I could have more of that, that seems like it would be a good thing to work on. And so that then once I got more into that space, the mindfulness and meditation space, and meeting people who were actually deep practitioners, not to say that they are all pure and clean in their offerings, but I have found in those spaces those who are very intentional about cultivating the heart space and understanding their mind and really understanding the human condition. There is a sincerity in their presence and a fulfillment that at that time was very compelling to me, and to this day is very compelling to me. And that at least showed me that there was a promise here to a particular path and an outcome of what it could look like in a human.
Wow. What a great contrast between those two women and the New York Stock Exchange guy, and the way you described those experiences and your responses to them. So it's not so much that, you were in the presence of someone who was just like, overly excited. In fact, it was their containment and their groundedness and stability that seemed to really make an impression on you. And as you said, it seemed independent of external things like how people were behaving or reacting. And it's like a superpower, right? It's like you were witnessing a superpower, and you said, wow, like that's impressive. And I'd like some more of that, please.
Yeah.
Where was that? You said where did you say that first retreat was?
Yeah, so that's a cool story there. Well, the cool thing is that retreat was at Omega in upstate New York. So it was the first retreat I ever went on. And I will be leading a retreat in the same meditation hall of that retreat center this upcoming summer,
Amazing.
like 13 years later or something. So it's cool to see things coming full circle.
Beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks.
So, okay. So what were now, a big part of your story is this time you spent in Burma. And so could you take us from this initial workshop at Omega to Burma, how you ended up spending 6+ months in a monastery in Burma? It was not an impulsive decision, I'm guessing. I'm guessing that there were some gradients and steps along the way.
Yeah, and it was probably pretty impulsive.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just very much my personality type. So they had that experience my junior year of college. So I was 21 at the time, that retreat. And immediately after that, this is what my mind does. It goes, oh, that seems interesting. I want what that person has. How do you do that? Oh, you meditate. Okay, well, I'm meditating like 15 minutes a day. Well, what if I just meditated all day long? Like, would I get there faster? And I've always just had this thing about like how to get somewhere faster and more efficiently. And and my personality type has always liked intensity, for better or worse. Can definitely talk about all the ways for worse.
I can relate to that. And there's almost an impatience in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not almost.
It's like, I want it now sort of vibe. And I love that part of me. It's served me very well. It's hurt me in ways too. And it's the thing I probably most wrestle with. It's softened a lot, But the way it showed up at that time was, I thought then, I was like, okay, so I got to find a place uh, somewhere in India, I thought, or I thought like on a mountain that I could just, live as a hermit or a monk. And I had heard of Eat, Pray, Love, so I thought maybe I'd do that. I didn't really know what that looked like. And so this is an example of now the intention is maturing. There's a deeper clarity of like, oh, I have a sense of what I want,
Hmm.
but I don't really know the logistics of it. And when that happens, I say, really just let yourself trust the energy of the intention. And at that time, I didn't have that much trust, but what I was doing was just like, I know I want something like that. And people would ask me, what are you going to do after college? And I'd say things like, I think I'm going to sit on a mountain somewhere. And I had enough like confidence in myself to just say that and not be ashamed of it. But everyone was just like, what are you talking about? And so eventually that led me to talking to someone at Allegheny College where I went to undergrad who was a meditation teacher. I took a class with him. I was asking him, like, where do you go if you want to go deeper into this stuff? He was telling me places in upstate New York that you could go that were more yoga based and where you could work there and you could, practice a couple hours a day. And I was like, is that it? And it's like, no, it didn't feel like it, but I was like, maybe that's the only option there is. So I sort of stayed with it. And I highlight the details because I know other people go through this stuff where you
Absolutely.
kind of have a desire and you're getting feedback and you're like, maybe. And so for me, it was like, maybe, but it wasn't lighting me up. And that's the tension of the not knowing yet. You're kind of staying in this space of there's something that wants to come through, but I don't quite have the doorway. And so I went all through college, deepening my own practice, learning, reading about this work, keeping the energy of that alive, but really not knowing yet what it would look like to go deeper into this. And then I had started my mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher training. They had told us you need to go on silent meditation retreats if you want to get certified in this. I was like, oh, cool,
Ah.
silent meditation retreat. That sounds more of what I'm looking for. And they told us a place called Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. So I went on a 7-day silent retreat there with my dad when I was 22, right after college. It was a loving kindness retreat. We had a very interesting experience there. Um, and I, I, I felt, well, it's not like I had this massive awakening while I was there. For the most part, I kind of just felt it was boring. It was kind of insightful, but I had a lot of pain in my knees. But there was still something compelling about, it's like, all right, I'm not good at this. I clearly am not good at this yet. What would happen when I do become good at this? And at a certain point, people get good at this and cool things happen. So I have to just get to that point. And I talked to the teachers there, and they were the ones they were referencing during their talks of time they spent over in Asia or these longer retreats. So I said, that's what it is. So I talked to them. I said, where do you go if you want to do something like this and you want it to be really hard and really intense? And they sort of smiled at me and said, well, some of the best teachings are over in Burma. And if you want it to be really difficult, where you practice all day long, there's a place called Pandita Rama where you could study with this great teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita, who passed away in 2016. And they said, this is how it would work and how you could go. And 3 months later, I was on a plane to Pandita Rama in Burma, and went into a 6.5 month silent retreat. And that the schedule of that was basically everything I had in my mind when I originally had my intention, but I had no idea what it could look like or where it would be. It
Hmm.
was you wake up at 3 a.m., you go to bed around 10 p.m., minimum of 14 hours of practice each day, 2 small meals before 11 a.m., just like austerity and intensity that I'm not promoting for everyone by any means. I discourage most people from going into settings like that because, especially if you've had trauma,
Hmm.
those experiences can actually just like wind you up even more. They're not necessarily beneficial, but it's what I was looking for at the time, and it worked with my particular nervous system. And yeah, that's how that all unfolded.
Wow, yeah, total immersion. And
Yeah.
there's a couple of interesting threads that I want to pull on before we get deeper into that experience in Burma. The first was you mentioned that you attended that loving kindness retreat 7 days with your dad. Now I know from just reading up on you, your dad's a physician, right? You grew up on Long Island.
Hmm.
What was his experience with that retreat?
Yeah, well, I'd have to let him share that one day publicly. We and I think he's been open about sharing this as well, though. He struggled with it. He was going through a difficult time in his life where, I have two siblings. We were all growing up and, leaving college. His parents, my grandparents, were dealing with dementia and slowly dying.
Mm,
There's a lot shifting in his professional life. And so it all, when you're silent for 7 days and you're bringing all of your attention here, everything that you can typically distract yourself from, just served to you on a platter. And I think I know it all kind of came together at a head for him and was a lot to hold. Um, but he had a very, very deep integration and some big insights working through the pain of that and getting to meet it on the other side of the 7 days. But he was ready to leave, and I was mostly just bored. Um, yeah, and we got there late as well. We didn't know any rules, so we just knew it was a silent retreat. There was a snowstorm. We got in late. Everyone was already silent, and then they put us in separate rooms. So we just we got there. We hardly got to
ah,
say goodbye, and then we were just in it. And we didn't want to break the rules. Now I know, these days, it would be okay if you pulled him aside and said, "Hey, is this all right?" But back then, we didn't know anything. Silence has a certain austerity to it when you go into these places because nobody's smiling. Everyone looks like they're angry at you when they're not. It's just, you're just silent. So yeah, he had an intense experience, but it was very fruitful.
fascinating. The other thing I wanted to follow up with was you mentioned that, your knees were in pain from presumably from sitting for all that time. And you described yourself as bored during it and that you felt like you weren't good at it, is the way you put it. Now,
Mm,
what's so interesting to me is that a lot of people having an experience like that, even if they were really enthusiastic about it going in, that would be enough to make them go, not for me, and literally close that door and do something else or pursue something else. But it had the opposite
mhm.
effect on you. You were even that much more determined to, find what it was all about and what was to be gained from doing this. You were still you. It sounded like it almost fueled your curiosity even more. Do you have any idea why that might have been, or any thoughts or reflections about that?
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. My best guess is not necessarily one that I'm proud of. Well, I feel like I'm obligated to say that because it feels egoic. I've
Mm,
had this ever since I was a kid, just this desire to be the best at things. Like when I was 5 years old, in kindergarten, I would rush to the front door when it was time to go to gym class so that I could be the line leader. When I was in fifth grade, I wanted to run for class president, and it just all these things that I look back on and just my heart opens, and I love that part of me, and it's I think now well integrated.
mm,
But in the early stages of all of this, or where I think that particular pattern showed up here, was that I was seeing that this was a difficult thing to do. And I was seeing that a lot of other people were struggling with it as well. And I think that always kind of compelled me. When there were high barriers to entry to something, it typically meant that there was something special on the other side that not many people would get to experience. And so the part of me that potentially likes to be special or just likes to do special things arouses some energy to move forward. And to maybe make it a little bit more noble, I think of the Baruch Spinoza quote, and it's one that I put on my wall while I was in Burma, where he said, "All noble things are as difficult as they are rare." And I think I've just always been interested in things that are they don't come easily. They require some work, often a significant amount, because typically it means that there's something special on the other side, which is not to glorify pain. I think many times we get in patterns of thinking like pain equals reward, and that is, if you take that with you throughout your entire life, you are, I mean, that can also be incredibly dysfunctional and cause it can be an avoidance strategy where you use the intensity of the pain to actually avoid being in the discomfort of just being, because there's some unhealed wound there. And so manufactured pain can be a way to avoid the pain of not feeling good enough or alone or like no one loves you. So again, it's not to glorify the pursuit of pain, but in general, when you look at anyone who's achieved anything that is special or unique, including just qualities that we admire, it's usually something that needs to be developed, and you'll find patterns and habits that have supported the development of that.
Great answer. Thank you for that. A lot of nuances in that. There's everything from sort of competitiveness and ego to curiosity and an appreciation for the fact that difficult things require a lot, worthwhile endeavors require a lot of perseverance and willingness to face difficulties, and being convinced that there's something worthwhile on the other side can help you summon up the motivation to pursue those things.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you signed up for this experience at the monastery in Burma, I'm curious to know, what was the commitment you were making, and what, how did they screen? Because I can imagine lots of young people have fanciful notions, romantic ideas of, I'm going to Burma, I'm going to do, but it's going to be the real deal, and they get there and they have no idea what they're in for. I mean, I don't think anyone really would know what they're in for, but what sort of screening was there, or what criteria did they insist on in order to even allow you to do such a thing?
Not much. I mean, you fill out a couple pages of a PDF form. I think there's some questions around mental health and meditation background, and if you're working with a therapist, kind of just to get a sense of, is there any significant trauma here? Have you explored your internal world with another or yourself? Um, I think things to have on their radar. But in general, my sense of it is like, if you were really sincere and you wanted to go, you could go. And a lot of these monasteries historically, a lot of the way Westerners found them is they would just be like backpacking through India or Burma, and less Burma back in the day, but more India. And you just kind of knock on the front door of these places and ask them to let you in. And sometimes they say no, but you come back again and ask, and they say no again, but you come back a third time, then they'll let you in, something like that. And so, yeah, the intention is the most important thing, but not a very robust screening criteria.
Interesting. They didn't want to
Yeah.
they were going to give you the benefit of the doubt and welcome people and not question their sincerity, I guess.
Yeah, and with that said, though, I only have my experience going through that, and it's possible if someone indicated something, that maybe they were navigating intense PTSD, or like they might have more of an intentional conversation with them. I think there's much more awareness, especially in the last like 5 to 10 years, around backgrounds and experiences and trauma, and how it intersects with intensive meditation practice, especially the work of Willoughby Britton, who has really brought light on the dark side of intensive practice and where it can go wrong, and things that can get activated in people, and an unraveling that can happen, which is still rare, but more common than perhaps was previously thought. And I'm not sure how some of these monasteries navigate that now, because there's always in my experience, less of an integration of what we could name as like Western psychology with Eastern philosophy than there is in the monasteries and retreat centers here in the West. But Yeah, it's not uncommon for people to end up in those places who I don't want to say shouldn't be in those places, but it's not the best next step for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Another quick logistical question I was curious about. So I know that Sayadaw did not speak any English, your teacher.
Mm.
How was the training instilled? Were there, and how many people were you with? Was it a cohort of people that were supposed to be there for the entire 6 months? And what did the training, aside from the number of hours which you mentioned, what did the training look like in practice in terms of um, actual teaching and guidance and making it English friendly, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So to paint the picture for everyone, like when you come to a place like this, aside from, getting to the airport and taking this motorbike ride down a path that you feel like you're not even going to make it to the monastery because every bump seems like you're going to get flown off this motorbike. But once you actually arrive there, you go to the front desk, they give you a pamphlet with some basic instructions. You find your room, which is this very modest cement floored place with a single bed. Um, and the bed is like you could squeeze the mattress between your fingers and feel the bone on the other side. So very, very thin, cold showers, all of that. But you basically have like a few hours of orientation. They'll take you into this room with a cassette player and play this hour-long instruction of how to do the practice, which is essentially some version of bringing your attention on the sensations of the rising and falling of the abdomen. In that tradition, you're doing a noting practice where you make a mental label of everything that you're experiencing. So on the inhale, you would note rising, rising, like so the belly is rising, and then on the exhale, it's falling. And then you might get more granular. On the inhale, you might note hardness or tightness or stiffness. On the exhale, you notice ease and space. And a thought comes up and you note thinking or worry, or pain comes up, and you note pain or heat or tension. And the idea is of that particular practice is that you're really bringing your attention closer to the direct, raw, real experience that's here, not the story about it, not the knee-jerk response that comes up of pain in my knee. Oh, I hate this, I got to get out of here. You're really paying attention to, oh, there's pain. Okay, what is pain? It's heat, it's tingliness. Oh, when that happens, then the thought gets triggered, and the thought is, oh, I hate this. That thought that seems like that's me or the voice of truth. It's like, oh, interesting. When the pain's not there, that thought goes away and then you're happy. When it is there, then there's a thought that comes in that says, this is terrible. Oh, so you start noticing things happening in a very impersonal way. And you see that the causal relationship between what you'd often refer to as your happiness or your suffering, and being able to see that clearly by noting your experience on a moment to moment level. One, gives you more space to not take it so seriously, to be able to respond rather than react. It's very easy to just like feel the intensity of that pain and then go like, I'm done with this. This doesn't make any sense. How does this relate to happiness? And that would just be an unconscious spiraling of thoughts. Or you can notice like, oh, when the pain is there and then the thought comes up of how much I hate it, and then I notice an emotion of anger come up. And when the anger is there, then the pain seems to get worse. Like, oh, interesting. Well, what if I like just allowed the thought to come and go, or I just brought my attention to my breath, or just be with the sensations of the pain? You see that you could actually start to turn up and down the intensity of suffering. So that's the basic practice that we're given in that first hour of that we're supposed to do. Basically, just note every aspect of your experience from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, with 14 hours of structured meditation throughout, which is an hour of sitting meditation and an hour of walking meditation, which is very slow walking back and forth. Kind of looks like a bunch of zombies just like walking in space. It's a little disconcerting the first time you see it. That can be enough to turn people away. Be like, am I like drinking the Kool-Aid? Am I going to lose my mind going to this place? Because it just looks weird. Like you're not used to it if you've never been in a place like this. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, this is strange. Like I don't want to turn into whatever this looks like. But you just have to understand that's like the structure of the place. If you really want, or the structure of the practice, meaning like if you really want to understand your internal world, well, one, you're probably going to have to not like spend so much time on your cell phone or TV or all these distractions. So you kind of first maybe eliminate some of that. Next, you're probably going to want to slow down a little bit, because the faster you go, the easier it is to miss things.
Hmm.
And so it kind of, what you end up with is basically just like a bare bones place with a bunch of people going very slowly, not really making eye contact, because even that can be distracting. And just it looks like you're doing a bunch of navel gazing, or that you've lost your soul. But it's the opposite. Like, you were just coming so intimately into your life. And so, right, you get that first hour, and then I go like, good luck. And then you join in with whoever's there. So there's no particular cohort there.
Hmm.
At certain times of the year, they might have people come in for a particular structure of time. Like, there was a 2-month retreat called the Special Retreat. It was an interesting branding of it. I don't know why it was just the Special Retreat, but it was December and January. And that was when the main teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita, would be giving talks every single day. So people would come in all around the world for that.
Hmm.
But the only instruction afterwards is you're given it's called a Dharma talk. The Dharma is just it's a word to describe like the teachings or the truth. So you're given a talk and it's translated typically from Burmese into English. So half of it's in Burmese, half of it's in English, which really requires, at least for me, like a lot of focus, because it's very easy for me to zone out, especially during the Burmese part. And so you get that 1 hour a day. Sometimes it was recording, sometimes it was in person. And then you get to meet with your teacher for a few minutes once every 3 days at best. There were some times where we would go weeks without seeing our teacher. And so there were times in the monastery where there were a couple hundred people there, but most of the time it was somewhere between like 5 to 20 of us. And and you're just left to a lot of trial and error, which I don't think is the best. Like, ideal would be if you can be working with a teacher like very regularly and asking questions, perhaps after even each meditation. This is what comes up. How do I respond? But I also liked going through the wrestling of it, like long periods of doubt, of really not liking Sayadaw U Pandita, not liking the place, thinking that it lacked heart and it was too intense. And I don't even want to be like these people anyway. Like, no, everyone looks miserable. It's just stories in your head to justify, at least for me, of like why this is hard and why I shouldn't have to do it anyway. So I liked going through those long periods of kind of catching myself when I was in a victim mentality, or feeling like, why do I have to do this? And then remembering like, dude, like, what are you talking about? This is the ultimate privilege to be able to do this. Like, you're taking time off, you're getting to understand your mind. So navigating all of that, and doubt, like how heavy the mind state of doubt is, and then what it means to just, you know what, if I'm gonna be here, let me fully commit to what this is, and what I'm being told to do, without questioning everything or bringing in my own idea of what it should be. And then, I would do that, and it would completely transform my practice, and there'd be all this new energy. And so you learn a lot by not being given a lot of instruction and just being left with the very basic technology of your own awareness with whatever is coming up in the laboratory of your experience. And I think that's one of the cool things about meditation, is you don't really need much, just sincerity, a willingness to show up, a willingness to be humbled a lot, because you're gonna take a beat down, a psychological, emotional, and physical beat down if you go through that intensity. And just like a deep curiosity for what it means to be human. And with all of that said, meditation practice does not need to be this sledgehammer to the head. Like, we're talking about like intensive meditation practice, and I think it is important to know that kind of training has a certain intensity to it and can be difficult, but it also becomes beautiful fairly quickly. Like, once you reach a certain level of concentration, the mind really settles, gets calm. You're not pulled in all these different directions. You feel a sense of peace and happiness that's unlike anything you've ever experienced before. And it's like it's steady. It's not impacted by pain or pleasure. It's equanimity, really profound states of heart opening and joy and bliss. So all of that becomes available. You're not doing it for nothing. But most people are not going to go on a intensive meditation practice, not because they necessarily don't want to, although there's plenty in that category, understandably so. But usually it's just like, I have kids, I have a family, or I like my job, or, I can't take 2 weeks off or a week off, or, let alone 2 months or 3 months or 6 months off. And so the integration of meditation for many people usually starts with like 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, or 1 minute a day. And my experience of that is that actually becomes, that experience is more pleasant than it is rough, especially in the early stages, because you're getting the most difficult aspect of that tends to be the on-ramp to it, all the procrastination and the resistance
Right.
to
Just
taking 5 minutes.
getting yourself to sit down and do whatever you agreed to do, right?
Right.
How long did it take you to arrive at that more peaceful place, roughly for you when you were,
In in the monastery,
yeah,
or
yes.
yeah. It went in and out. Even though the first week was one of the hardest weeks of my life, I had some really profound moments of peace and bliss amidst very intense pain that, were some of the things that kept pulling me forward. Like, oh, there's something here. By the time that it really like steadied out, where I was just in this very consistent place of balance, ease, openness, and joy, that was closer to the 4 month mark.
Wow.
So between like
Yeah.
the last 2 months.
I know that, the way these things are structured here in the States, the rules are much, you're basically living like a renunciate. There's no technology allowed, no books, no reading, no writing, no music, nothing. And no distractions and no contact with the outside world. So was that the case? Like, did you literally not write home for 6 months? Did you have any contact at all with your family and friends during that period of time?
Yeah, there was a one time where one of the big longer retreats was letting out. I wrote a letter to someone who I temporarily ordained with, and he was leaving. And I asked him if he could send that letter to my parents. So he typed that up on my behalf. And I think I asked them to send me like a jug of protein powder and something. I was like worried I was getting protein deficiency. Yeah, so I did get one shipment while I was there, but that was the only communication.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that in detail. I know other interviews that I've listened to with you, that all that stuff is glossed over. So I wanted to really get a good sense of that, and to have people really really get a sense of just what that 6 months, was like. And that's of course just a taste, but it's great. And in the interest of just covering some other things that I'd love to ask you. So you got home from that experience, and in the book you described a dinner table interaction that you had with your dad, and it made me think of the classic Ram Dass quote, where he says, "If you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family."
Mm-hmm.
So here you are, you're ordained as a monk, you've had this profound experience in Burma, of very, very intense meditation and all that goes along with it, all of the insights that you experienced, and then you're back in your childhood home, presumably, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have this conversation with your dad. So can you tell us a little bit about that moment?
Yeah, it was, to me, it just illuminated how it's one thing to cultivate this deep peace and contentment in a monastic setting when there's no family or need to make money or distractions. And it's another thing to do it in the real world, especially with family who know how to push your buttons the most because they put them there in the first place. And so it was something along the line. It was my dad's fear around like me making money, and like everyone was, the next day or 2 days after I was home, or 3 days, whatever it was, everyone was, waking up to go to work. And my brother was still in school, but and I wasn't yet. I forgot what I was doing, but and he uh, oh, well, there's two experiences. The dinner table one, but this one I'll just finish first. And it was like, yeah, well, now that you're home, you have to figure out, what you're gonna do for work. And it wasn't said with any malicious intent, but it did have this tone that was very familiar to me as his son, of just like, oh, dad's mad. And I just remember like it triggered this whole like young collapse, internal collapse of like 13-year-old Cory with his head down, ruminating. It was like, oh, I hate being home. I hate being told what to do. I hate my dad. And I had enough self-awareness from meditating for so long that I could just watch that whole process unfold. But it was very fascinating to me to see that, like, oh, there's another level of integration now. There was like developing certain practices alone in solitude, and it was a great space to do it. Now I have to bring that where it's really going to matter the most, which is my life in the real world, if I'm choosing to be here and not in a monastic setting. And to this day, I'm still working on that. There were just endless layers of all of it, and I've really learned to, instead of viewing an endpoint, just love the journey of getting activated and seeing, oh, there's another layer that's unhealed, or like an opportunity to soften or to let go or to open. Because if you don't have that orientation to it, you're just going to drive yourself mad, because it doesn't really end. Even like the most enlightened human, there's like something that ends, maybe like taking the sense of self too seriously, but you're still in human form, which means there's still activation. There's still different emotions. There's still like triggers out of nowhere. And people say something that activates wound patterns that were put in from an early age. And so you get to fall in love with like, oh, this is where I'm at right now. And each layer of working with the activation that's here, or the unconsciousness that's here, is just going to take me, it's just like another opportunity to go one step closer to more openness, more reception, more allowing and permission. But yeah, that was the first wake up call of like, oh, this isn't done yet. And I had a very young orientation of going to Burma and then being done, and then everything else would just be gravy on my life. And it didn't quite work like that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I know in true Cory fashion, you really, intensely continued training yourself. You got a master's degree in positive psychology from UPenn, with studying with Martin Seligman. Is that who founded that?
Yes.
I could ask you 10 questions about that, but I really do want to honor the time that we have together and make sure I cover at least some other things. But you also did an enormous number of trainings in a lot of different modalities, all of which people can, if they go to your website, they can read about in detail. And I just wanted to ask you a general question. From studying so many different modalities, neuro-linguistic programming, Ericksonian hypnosis, you did 200-hour hatha yoga training, and many, many other things. What have you learned from studying all those different modalities? Did you notice any significant overlap among them? And were there any like really significant takeaways for you personally from any or all of those? That's a big question, but
Yeah. I think the main thing, it's hard because there's so many of them are different kinds of trainings, and they've all served different functions. Like NLP and hypnosis are good for maybe quicker behavior change or inducing certain emotional states. And then some of the trauma work is good for working with particular wounds or knowing how to hold space. Positive psychology was interesting from an academic lens, and understanding the science of happiness. But the thing that's emerged most in probably the last couple of years has just been a deep respect for the uniqueness of each person's journey
Mm.
and the uniqueness of my own journey. And that, like, yeah, there's so many tools that I can pick up and things that I can bring in, um and they're good and they're useful and they make a big difference. But there's also a particular karmic momentum to my life that I often just need to get out of the way. And the deepest practice has just been like letting go, listening
Mm.
to what wants to come through right now, what feels most true, like most spacious, most clear, in a way that I'm not wrestling with it, and then just like surrendering to that. That has been the biggest thing. And
Mm.
if you get a little too caught up in different paradigms and modalities, then you can prematurely try to layer those onto your own experience and like manufacture something that's not actually yours. Like if you think like I need more positive emotion, but you're going through like a dark night of the
Mm.
soul experience that actually needs you to descend more deeply into the pain until it can open, and you like kind of just break something in you in the best way possible, like break like the part that's holding on, that's trying to control, like that usually gets more painful before it gets better. But if you're just like, no, I'm gonna, I gotta wake up and I gotta do my cold plunge, my sauna, and my journaling, and then go into, then it's just like you're it's coming too much from the head and not actually from the
Mm.
aliveness of what's here. And that's coming from someone who just loves patterns and habits and structure. Uh, and so the biggest takeaway for me of doing all of these things has just been, they're great, but the deepest thing is like very much uniquely mine. And I have to be listening to that moment to moment to moment. And
Mm.
maybe that means the deepest skill is that the capacity for that internal listening.
I love it. And you kind of answered my next question, but I just wanted to share with you the other day, I'm in my neighborhood going for a walk, and there's a guy coming the opposite direction from me. And he's got one of those like front loading baby carriers, right? So his baby is facing outward, and he's walking his dog, and he's got his earbuds in. And I can see he's doing something on his phone, texting or messaging or whatever. And he's walking.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, and the thing is this is not an uncommon sight. It really is not. Like we are so unbelievably um, overstimulated, and the expectations on us are so, and demands that are either put on us or we put on ourselves to get things done and be productive, are so over the top that we are, to quote the title of your book, we're missing our lives. We're not even there. We're just like,
Hmm.
we're just attending to things, and we're not. So if you had to do an elevator pitch, let's say like this very guy walked onto an elevator and the power went off, and you're stuck in this elevator with him, and so his phone isn't working, and he's
Hmm.
forced to interact with you. What would be your quote unquote elevator pitch for uh, practicing? He says, well, what do you do? And you tell him, you're a mindfulness teacher. What would be your like literal elevator pitch to this guy for why he should bother taking precious time out of his day when he has all these things to be doing, to be spent on paying attention to his breath?
Yeah. Well, first thing is I'd never give him the elevator pitch. And I know we're playing in hypothetical, so I'll play with it all. I've always struggled with the elevator pitch. In like anytime anyone even asks me what I do, or like
Mm.
tell me why I should do, this stuff, it's just never been my approach to try to convince someone. I've always just like led my life, tried to integrate these things myself, and then share in a public way. And if people are pulled to it, great. If not, I really honor that. If we were in an elevator together and he asked, I'd I'd start with the mindfulness and meditation. Like this is kind of what I do at a high level, and I would only proceed if he showed curiosity.
Hmm.
And what I would want to explore would be, what is it that he's curious about? What there is alive for him? And if he wanted to take it deeper, then I just want to understand, like, what in his life is meaningful to him? Where does he feel like he's struggling? Um, and I just slowly kind of integrate, only if it seems like it would be useful, uh, different practices that could maybe help alleviate suffering and offer some guidance. Um, so yeah, it's my annoying roundabout answer, or way of saying that, I would just try to meet where this person is and the truth of where they are, and only if there's something there about what I can offer and where they are that wants to dance and find its way into some sort of path, then I'd follow that. If you wanted me to more just give like the more predictable answer of this, or like the better answer, the less annoying one, which is like, it would just be, yeah, you can keep leading your life, getting the dopamine hits of having your head down, looking on your cell phone, being on social media, which is a ton of fun, and there's a lot of stimulating stuff there. But in my experience, what it does is it desensitizes you to the subtle joy, um, and the subtle, like, rich experience of your life that really makes up the most of your life, like the relationship with your partner, with your kid, and when you're waking up in the morning, and as you're going to start to age and you're going to transition out of this life, like, there's so many fluctuations to experience, that you can't escape. And if you're only training yourself to zone out and to get like a short chemical cocktail that makes you feel better about something, or this like low level despair and confusion and fear, then you're basically like not actually living your life. You're trying to live one step hovering above your life so that you don't have to descend into the actuality of it. And eventually that's going to catch up to you, because it's exhausting to stay
Hmm.
up there. You're either going to continue staying up there and just end up being more disembodied. People around you are not going to be able to feel you. You'll be around people who only fulfill that way of living, which is also disembodied, also disconnected. So you're going to have superficial conversations. If there is any inkling of like, I want more meaning in my life, you're going to find this frustration between some deep desire within you and everything that's manifested around you externally, because everything that's manifested around you externally is a representation of how you've been living your life. And so the further down that path you go, the longer it is to come back, the more work there is to come back, and the more you end up feeling, when you do eventually have some awakening, like, whoa, I miss a lot of my life.
Hmm.
And and sometimes it's hard to see that in the early stages, because we're so caught in the addiction of distraction and busyness. And what I would suggest to someone is to spend 1 or 2 days doing some form of digital detox, or
Hmm.
seeing if you can spend time
Hmm.
alone in the woods, and just note how hard that is. See how hard it is, and let the difficulty of how hard that is trouble you into a deeper conversation with your soul about how you're living your life. And why is it so hard that you
Hmm.
can't just sit on the couch and be, or walk out in the trees, or just be with your child or your partner without feeling something uncomfortable and reaching for caffeine or
Or
distraction?
just being with yourself, right? And your own
Being with
mind. I mean,
yourself.
it seems like that's what people are avoiding everywhere you go, even when they're doing things recreationally that you would think you would want to disconnect. I could be on a hiking trail and seeing people hiking or mountain biking, and they've got their earbuds in, they're listening to a podcast, or they're talking, having a conversation. It's like, no, you came, like, you really, is that what, like, you want to be, like, don't you want to be disconnected even for a moment when you're in the beautiful outdoors? And
Yeah.
okay, couple other real quick things before we get wrap this up. And by the way, I think I liked your first answer because um, you know, because it was so the opposite of proselytizing. You're not out to, like, tell someone else how to live their life. And I think that that actually commands a lot more respect than, but I mean, I did appreciate the elaboration as well, because it is something I think a lot of people can relate to. And it probably isn't until people reach, a point where they're really, really unhappy with the status quo that it even occurs to them to think about doing something differently. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned you mentioned in passing this idea of letting go, and
Mhm.
and this is a huge, huge thing, I think. And I've also listened to talks that you've given where you discuss kind of like the ego versus the soul, right? The lowercase s self versus the capital S, higher self.
Mhm.
The false self versus the true self. How, getting quiet is one way to get in touch with what's even happening and what is even true for you. But can you offer, before we end this, some kind of litmus test for listeners to help them discern when they have an idea or an inkling or a hunch or a feeling or a curiosity? How do we know when it's our ego that thinks, oh, if I do this, I'll be a big shot, or I'll really, how can we discern when it's that voice versus when it's actually that sort of still small voice within that intuitive higher knowing? What would you offer listeners for tips, or how you might distinguish between those two? I think it can be very tricky.
Yeah, it can be. And I think the process of getting to the simplicity of it is its own massive journey. My my experience of so two things I'll offer. One, first get sensitized to and clear on the areas in your life that feel very clear and
Mm,
like a yes. And what it where you're not wrestling, you're not going into like, should I do this or not? There's just like oh, this is true. And it could be something as simple as like, do I love my child? Or do I love my dog? It's just like, yeah, of course, right? So no, okay, so what is the experience of like, yeah, of course, and then like, what's something that's a no that you're just like very clear on, that's not it for me. It's like, do I condemn Hitler? It's like, yeah, yeah, and so you feel like that's a no. All right, so you take like the really obvious things that you already know, and like, what does that feel like?
mm,
What's the process in the mind? And then what's something that's like an I don't know for you? Maybe you're in a relationship, you're not sure if you should get out or not, or a job, if or where you live, and you're just like, yeah, I don't know. It's like there's ambiguity, and so you just hold that experience. That's foundational to be able to navigate your life with clarity. First, being sensitized. This is a yes to me. This is a no, and this is an I don't know. With the discernment between like the soul space and the ego space, which again are just words that we're layering on to aspects of experience. You could call it the higher self, lower self, in the way that you've said. If you understand the ego as a set of patterns and mechanisms and behaviors and beliefs that have developed over a course of a lifetime to protect you while in human form, because the human form has needs, then my experience of the ego place, and it's not just me who says this, you're gonna like hear this across spiritual disciplines as well, that there's a tightness when that's there. There's like a protection, there's a bracing, there's a noisiness to it, or there's even like a lust quality,
mm,
which is interesting when you think of like falling in love. A lot of people think of like falling in lust as love, but like real love actually has this still spacious quality, not this like trauma response kind of lust of, oh, this person's going to solve all my problems, I love them forever, right? That's usually related to something more in the level of the ego. And so like the ego has uh, the ego has this like tense, contracted, agitated, excited space quality, and then the soul space has this still, spacious, open, non-argumentative, receptive quality. And I think it takes some time to be able to be sensitized to those two, but that's one way to start to explore. Is this coming from the ego, or is this coming from the soul.
I love that answer, starting with those obvious polarities, drilling down and paying attention to those sort of subtle feelings. And the way you described the opposite of ego basically was reminded me of the way you described the two women that led that first retreat that you
Mm,
attended, and the way that they presented as sort of calm and stable, not like super excited and like rah rah, but like actually, some kind of a spaciousness and a contentment and a peacefulness. And so that's also a really interesting distinction, I think, because we often get the message that we should have like, the excitement is where it's at, right? But um,
mhm.
Cory, thank you so much. I could talk with you for hours. I really appreciate everything that you shared. And I want to ask one final question and then have you tell listeners where they can go to experience your various teachings and offerings. So the final question is, I really love the name of your podcast, Practicing Human.
Mm.
And I want to know for you where you are currently right now in your life and in this interview and in this moment. Um, who do you aspire, to be or embody moving forward? Who is the person you're most wanting to be now at this phase and stage of your life? And what do you think is the most difficult aspect of stepping into that?
Yeah. Uh, Again, it might be an annoying answer, but I think my journey right now is like really letting go of any idea of anyone I should become,
Ah,
especially trying to layer someone else's experience or even qualities. You can always look up to qualities, but
hmm,
I easily got and often get seduced by seeing someone else's path and like wanting to
hmm.
mimic it. Like, and that's that comes easily to me. Just look at their patterns and create them and do them and implement them. But I am like very much in a process of letting all of that go and just staying with my moment to moment experience of what is true now and in the deepest way that I can access it for myself. And then just like letting go into it. And where that takes me, I have no idea, but I trust that it will take me closer to myself and to my path and to any sort of inner freedom and liberation that's possible.
That is a beautiful answer. I really appreciate all the work that you've done on yourself as well as in the world. It's so obvious that you have done an incredible amount of self-reflection and that you're very intentional about everything that you do and or certainly aspire to be. We all have we're human.
Mhm.
So where can people go who are interested in your teachings? You have a lot of free offerings as well. Um, where do you point people toward to learn more?
Yeah, on social media, most of my stuff is on Instagram, which you can find at Cory Muscara. You can find that on all the platforms: Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook. Um, but the one of the things that a lot of my students like is the daily text message that I send out, which is just this short, like 2 sentences at the beginning of the day, something to think about or reflect on, a question, a prompt. And so for anyone who wants to sign up for that, you just text the word, text the word Eric to 1631 305 2874, and that'll automatically subscribe you to that list. You can unsubscribe at any time. It's completely free. There's no strings attached. It's just like a nice way to get a simple thing in the morning to think about. And then Practicing Human is also a daily podcast where it's just me talking. So 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday. That's called Practicing Human. You can find it on any platform. Yeah, and yeah, Instagram is probably the best place to start.
Awesome. Cory, thanks again for your time and your presence today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everyone.